Are you introducing?
Yeah, I can introduce.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. This is the first episode of Undead, and we've got myself, Orion and
Hello, me, it's Max. Hi. AKA Slut.
We're going to be talking about amabs and movement building today. Those are the two topics that we've got on our agenda. So let's start with the first one, amab. For those who don't know, amab means assigned male at birth. And me and Max have a lot of things to talk about regarding this phrase. And I think, well, of course, the topic has a lot to do with masculinity and how people perceive masculinity in today's society. And yeah, today I wanted to just talk about what masculinity means for, well, not just for men, but for everyone. And, just see if we can learn something today from the discussion that we're about to have.
Yeah.
Why is it that you want to talk about amabs, Max?
Well, I am one.
Uh-huh.
And well, I mean, the reason that the term amab exists is because people no longer want to associate the term man with or male or masculine with whatever, with your biological makeup or whatever. And I guess the main thing that I want to talk about, but also that we often talk about is I don't know, we're both coming at it from a perspective where we've been through queer culture or queer identity and I don't know, there's been through a queer perspective on masculinity and male sex, being male, but also coming through that, I don't know, a period of being not comfortable with masculinity and malehood, but then coming around to finding ways of accepting it that kind of aren't expressed either in queer discourse or queer culture or mainstream culture or whatever, I feel there's been masculinities in the past and maybe still now that are healthy and viable and usable and that can contribute to healthy communities and societies, but that they're not being accessed because they're kind of driven out by this discourse about toxic masculinity. I mean, we're talking about masculinity right now, really, but it ties in with the amab thing because it's most people really still believe that, you're born male or female and that kind of defines your sex, and that still underpins the attitudes that are developed towards people in society, whether or not we like it, it's it's there, and people are going to have that association no matter how much they put their energy into suppressing it or whatever, which I used to do more when I was kind of more embedded in queer community, but I'm kind of a little bit more orbital now. So it's I don't feel too much under the sway of the rights and wrongs of the queer discourse or whatever. But I feel more comfortable just with there being that association between like the assigning of male gender to like male children or whatever, to children with penises. And also, you know, not having to be restricted by that either, which is kind of like the queerest thing for me, is not just like being like, oh my god, masculinity is disgusting, I have to like be something else or be like a woman or be whatever, you know, whatever different things people try to exchange that for. But being like, yeah, that is there, that perception is always going to be there. And like, how can I, well, like, how do I want people to perceive me, and how can I like kind of have some sway over the way people perceive me? That's not just like trying to manipulate people into like treating me a certain way, or trying to dominate people through like systematic, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, yeah.
Right.
So where are you at with your like gender now?
I mean, I feel very comfortably and irrevocably male right now, and that's been happening ever since I came back to ever since I came back to Japan. And it's interesting, this kind of notion I've felt of like a geographical relationship with my gender, as in the environment that you place yourself in has an effect on how you like perceive your gender. And yeah, coming to Japan basically gave me a chance to reset all of my like presumptions about masculinity. And it was also just a practical thing to try living as a cis man. Before that, I was a trans woman, and I didn't find a tenable way for me to continue that persona, let's call it, because, well, in the sense of like a Japanese environment, that like it is a persona, right? And I don't think there's anything wrong with personas, and like, you know, that's all fine. But yeah, there was no way for me to express that because of language difficulties, and also cultural expectations, and just like bureaucracy, all this kind of stuff. So it was like way too much for me to deal with, transitioning at the same time as like a literal transition from a British culture to a Japanese culture. And I'm like down for that. Like I'm into the idea of personalities and identities as being disposable and retractable, and, you know, using them until you aren't benefiting from them anymore. I think a problem that I've experienced with the queer community is that like it actually seems very, very conservative and regressive, in the sense that you know, there's a huge pressure to like commit to your identity, and for your identity to be like absolutely everything that you are. And like I've never felt, even when I was trans, I never felt that I was just trans, you know. And it sort of came to a point where it felt like I wasn't able to expand or develop myself, because like my transness was just eating up the whole of my existence. Then I started to look more into masculinity, which was opportunity offered to me by the fact of moving to Japan. And yeah, I was starting to look at ways in which masculinity can be used to support communities, and also to like to support men as well, right?
Mm.
You know, as a group that, you know, makes up 50% of most environments, it seems like pretty useful to me to you know, find ways to develop masculinity in a way that is healthy for everyone involved.
Well, I think like men need a lot of support where they're not getting it. Like people who live in like a masculine mode, like often try and be totally self-sufficient or get support in like kind of material ways, but not in emotional ways. So it's like part of like exploring, I mean, part of resolving that is about exploring masculinity and finding ways for it to be stable and balanced and emotional, you know, and I mean balanced with femininity, because it's like you can't, neither of them are going to be balanced without the other one being balanced. And I don't think, like, I think until people resolve their issues with the binary of masculinity and femininity, they're still going to be like stuck in those issues and not going to be able to like find more diverse modes of being or whatever. Like there's like interesting exploration happening in like the queer world and stuff, and like that exploration is good, but it's like if the exploration is coming from a point that's still, you know, like where your identity is still stuck in this like, I don't know, it's almost like an obsession with like the binary and like not being it and like being as experimental as possible, not with everyone, but it's like, you know, like if it's based on that foundation of like resisting that binary, then it's like gonna be pretty restricted and like exploring further outside of that binary.
Mm.
But I mean, like I'm not really looking for more masculine modes of living myself. Like I'm like, it's there, it's around and shit, and I'm like more comfortable with it in general than I was a few years ago. But I'm like, I wouldn't say that I'm like exploring it directly in my life. But I think like whether or not you choose to be masculine as like a man or a woman or like whatever else, like it's important to be comfortable with it being there, whether or not you want to engage with it or move beyond it or whatever, or like leave it behind. It's like, you know, like you're never going to control every other person in the world and their expression of their identity. So it's like if you're totally shut down by it even being there, you know, like if every time you see like someone like a real mask bro doing something that's real mask and bro, you're like totally shut down by it and you have to like talk it out for like a few days even, like to deal with the experience even when it's nothing to do with you. It's like that's not like a sustainable way to live your life. And it's like everyone's gonna have bits of masculinity floating around in their system and shit. Like you're gonna have to deal with and accept like those things being there to be able to like fully explore yourself.
Well, I'm interested in the like what you can actually get from exploring your masculinity, which, as you say, is something that everyone has, right? It's like a very potent technology that we use, but it feels like we're in a process of suppressing masculinity, which, yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the consequences will be of that, and whether or not those are. I'm kind of doubtful of the idea that a world without masculinity is like preferable to a world that does.
Well, it seems like in like suppressing it or suppressing anything really, but it seems like it's like the more you try and suppress it, the more it just comes out in other ways that are less healthy and less within our control or means of dealing with it. Like, you know, people just become, I don't know, like they find other ways of being dominating or controlling or like big or external, you know, like typical classical masculine modes, like just end up coming out in, you know, like subliminal, more toxic ways. I mean, that's what toxic masculinity really is about, is like the healthy masculinity being suppressed to a point where it like becomes like a sickness and like overflows onto the people around you or like between the people who are suppressing it or whatever. I mean, like I'm also not on like a men's rights activism buzz where I'm like, the world has to be taken back for men and we live in like a matriarchy and like women have been suppressing men forever and like all this shit, you know, like that shit is a real waste of time. And that is also like going in the same wrong directions that I think like identity politics or, you know, other forms of identity politics are going in. But like there does need to be a bit of like a sitting back and being like, okay guys, like what are the things that are like really going wrong? And it's like, I don't think the problems are embedded in masculinity or in men, but like the problems that we're having with men and masculinity and racist and like politics and, you know, whatever, all of these different like imbalances that we're having, like share the same problems and imbalances. Like it's not in each of them, it's like in like a much deeper, you know, layer of existence or whatever.
Right.
How are you going about like exploring masculinity?
Yeah. It's hard to answer that question because it feels like masculinity, you know, as a man is like so embedded into you that it's almost like an invisible force. So it's hard to delineate what it is because it's like so integral to like the way that you've been conditioned, or also the way that, and there is like a natural aspect to masculinity as well, or one might use the word biological, which, you know, people don't like that word for various reasons. But I mean, I'm not really into that vibe of denouncing biology. It's one way to engage and experience reality.
Yeah.
And it's fine. Like it's useful. Biology and science can be useful for things, but it's important to realize that it's just one way to look at it. And then we have different ways to look at the world through like mythology or philosophy, all this kind of stuff.
Racism.
Anyway, there's you know, millions, right?
Yeah.
I'm not into this idea that both like left-leaning people and right-leaning people have to do with like the concept of biological sex. It's like they're both trying to argue that their viewpoint is right, and it's like, why can't we just have different frameworks to analyze these very complex structures and use them both? And like that feels a lot more useful and interesting to me than trying to argue that, like, you know, sex is not a real thing or sex is everything, you know?
Yeah.
It's like a very boring and redundant and, you know, useless question to argue. Yeah, in the context of cis men, how one has access to their masculinity. Going back to your initial question, it's kind of like that on one level, my actions and my motives are masculine, or they're within this structure of masculinity, and then on the other hand, it's something that goes beyond that and can't strictly be analyzed as masculine. And maybe it's not really that important to know, you know, what it is that I'm doing or behaving, how much of that can be attributed to a certain masculinity. But the relation to being male, I feel that that connection needs to be very clear, and on like a personal level, I mean, like one needs to have a healthy relationship to their body and to but body as like a physical thing and also as like a mental experience too, because you know your mind is still part of your body, right?
And, yeah, and vice versa.
Yeah. And you know, maybe elements of the mind are masculine and maybe some of them are feminine. That seems pretty plausible to me, really. And it's not as if it's all just one or the other either. I mean, Jung talks a lot about, you know, one has to develop like one's like cisnormative sex, but they also have to develop the opposite counterpart to that sex as well in order to generate like a full, complete self. So I think also, yeah, if part of exploring masculinity for me, for example, is also exploring femininity too.
Well, I think like developing a connection to yourself and like exploring your like internal space is not a masculine mode, you know? Like it's something that you like need to develop some level of like feminine perspective or energy or whatever to be able to do, and which is also like what is not happening for many men, you know, like it's like stereotypes of men not sharing emotions or like talking about their experiences or talking about what's happening for them internally, and only like discussing or sharing, you know, like external things or like truth or whatever. But I think it's like like you said, like it's not about knowing what you're doing necessarily, but like if the more you are able to be in your self and in your body, like the more you're able to kind of like unravel, you know, like the dynamics of your relation to your body and to the world, and of your body to the world, you know, and all these relations that happen in between those things, like between things in the world. And like if you don't do that, or if you're not able to do that, like there's no way to really unravel anything that's happening in the world, because it's like you don't have a clear starting point anyway.
Right. And I feel like the fact that men find it difficult to be emotional is it's like a repression of their femininity, or like a refusal to explore that. But it's interesting that you say that it's like the impetus, you know, a bit behind like exploring oneself is essentially a feminine motive, right? So
well, the internality of it is, you know, in a typical way, like, you know, like, yeah, going inside and being inside, like the internal space is like historically at least feminine. But yeah, I think like that's something that is lacked in like the kind of mainstream explorations of like self and gender and men, but also like in the queer explorations of self and gender and men, you know, like it's not like I don't get a sense of like being in oneself and like being like having an understanding of what that is as a starting point before trying to change or transition like oneself or the world. It's like starting at the end in a way, like it's like trying to change the world and change the gender and change the body before really like being in it and trying to understand what it is. And it's like the amount of people that I know who have had surgery like in the last few years compared to the like 5 years before that is so much bigger. Like so many more people, you know, like in the last few years that I know than in the few years before. And it's like, I'm not going to say that it's not a valid practice, but it's like, is that the thing that is really going to resolve the tensions that you're having in your life and shit? I don't know, maybe you can speak a bit more of that, because you were kind of thinking more about a physical transition as well. I mean, like I was never really thinking about physically transitioning, because like my relationship with gender is about relationships with people and how like performativities and the dynamics between people relate to gender, you know, and like how people's perception of themselves relates to gender and how that, you know, builds up their relationships and therefore their communities and the whole of society.
Right. Well, I feel people turn to, let's say, like physical alteration of themselves, or that I suppose that can also include hormone therapy.
Yeah.
Because that is still like on a molecular level, it's you know, a physical thing, right?
Yeah.
I feel like that that seems to be like the choice that a lot of people go for, because because the emotional exploration or the interpersonal exploration is even harder to do than to physically alter oneself. And it's like it's because the emotional or the internal environment has just been like so congested that we don't even really know how to access it anymore. So it's almost like for yeah, when I was living in the UK, and I was pretty much on the verge of transitioning, and I decided not to because I wanted to go to Japan.
Because you wanted to what?
Wanted to go to Japan, which is like a better transition, basically. At the time, I felt like I could get a lot. It was like the choices were like to transition into femininity or to transition into like
Being Japanese.
like, well, being in a Japanese environment, right? I mean, both of those things are basically things that I felt like I wasn't in those spaces. I wasn't in the space of femininity, so I could choose to become a woman, or, you know, I wasn't in the space of Japan, so I could choose to move there. And for various reasons, personal reasons, I felt like going to Japan first and then transitioning would be a much easier process for me. Anyway, it turned out.
What do you think?
Go on.
Sorry, you go.
It turned out that like re-engaging with my masculinity here, and also being in an environment that I feel actually allows men to have an emotional engagement with masculinity through various cultural practices. One of them being like onsen, for example. I think that's like a super like homophilial way, and like a fraternal way to engage with your masculinity that is totally absent from Western environments.
What do you think about like the kind of relationship between like change and masculinity? You know, like there's kind of like a historical trend of like men being like the pioneers of things, and like women who do things first or early on or more profoundly or better or whatever being overlooked or whatever. And I'm kind of aware of like being like wanting to make a lot of change, and also being like amab, and then like also like I'm definitely much more, like I've kind of always been more focused on like working with women because I generally just find them more interesting and more dynamic. But like, what's your perspective on that, being like a man in the world, like trying to make the world happen?
Well, in a way, like man is just like an emblem, right? And
yeah. So like,
you're sort of like, say, you're talking about like men taking up space, right?
yeah, pretty much.
Right.
It's like if it's just the image, it's fine. But when the image is then afforded space, and then the body or whatever is not afforded space, then it's like a problem. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that I feel like that's we're kind of going through that process of like destroying the image. That's what we or like we want to like. Yeah, it's like we can't differentiate between the image and the actual like body, or like the negative, let's call it like the negative aspects of masculinity. It seems as if like no one can differentiate them from the like positive parts of masculinity. So it's like the response is just to like destroy the whole thing. And like does that like enable women to change the world as well? Because it's like going back to what you were saying before, of like if you try to remove masculinity, it just comes back as the toxic form, right?
It grows another head, or
Yeah.
whatever. It grows another dick.
Well, that just shows you how like integral it is to like the experience of humanity, and
Yeah.
like dumbing down the excellence of men in order to like allow women to like be on that same level, right? I feel like excellent men like create excellent women, and vice versa.
Yeah, it's like people want to like, yeah, people feel limited, so their response is to like try and limit other people rather than achieving their full potential or whatever.
Right.
Like, that's like what I really want to see in the world, is like, women and men and anyone else who, I don't care, animals and like plants and the air or whatever, like I don't care, like achieving like the fullest potential or whatever. And like people's like complaints about the state of things are just like holding that back. It's like the emotional experience like goes unchecked basically, and it's like it's not dealing with that kind of like internal suffering. It's just like displacing it onto the rest of the world or whatever.
Right. And you know, if you're like, if everyone is like doing that, if everyone is displacing onto the world, then it's like it becomes like a far more bigger problem than if it was just like you dealing with it by yourself.
Yeah.
Like, the world is not an infinite space, right? Like it will be congested if you keep
Yeah.
like trash into it. And yeah, like toxic masculinity is trash and toxic femininity is trash. And like throwing it into the world doesn't get rid of it. It's like, but like humans have the ability to like heal toxicity when they negotiate with it and try to engage with it in a meaningful way. That's like the holy transcendent experience of being a human. And
Mm.
it's like such a dank technology. It's like the ultimate like recycle technology, but like no one uses it.
Yeah. Um, yeah, like I think that is like the kind of like starting point of really moving or like movement in the world is like not just thinking about like what you want the image of the world to be like, but like it has to come from an internal space, and like then also thinking about what you're putting into the world and like how what kind of world or worldliness or like experiential image is like coming from your internal space,
Mm.
which yeah, like I mean like requires like emotional engagement with yourself and like feminine aspects and shit, and like engagement with like what is intangible and invisible and dark and like uncomfortable and shit.
Mm.
I mean like it's not a movement to like just talk about what you think the problems in the world are, or talk about what people need to do, you know, like tell people what they need to do and shit. Like I see stuff on the internet that's like a list, literally like a list of like things you have to do. It's like if you are category, you point,
Well, like,
and it's like
yeah, every trans person needs to watch this video. It's like, no, I don't.
I've already seen a video today. Like this video is not on my schedule.
Yeah, it's like, it's weird. It's so weird.
Yeah.
Going back to like the toxicity, you know, what if like the holiness and the excellence is like within the toxicity? It's like nestled within this huge, like congested and accumulated junk. And you need to go through the junk to like to find the beauty and like the actual worthwhile aspect of one's masculinity or one's femininity.
Yeah. Like you have to cultivate the impure like elements of your life or whatever. Sorry, I've been reading like Taoist texts, but like you have to like cultivate the impure to like make it pure and
Right.
shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well,
like that's kind of what the body is like supposed to be like a vehicle for or whatever, or like a tool for.
yeah. Right. And you know that they're interrelated. You know, it's not as if like people are excellent 100% of the time, and like they're just trying to get rid of the whole enterprise doesn't doesn't create doesn't generate progress.
Yeah, it's like throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Basically, yeah. that's exactly what it is. And then you're like left with nothing.
Yeah, just trauma and like suffering.
Yeah. You can't build movements with just trauma and suffering.
Well, you can, but they're not going to be very pleasant.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. They're not gonna have a lot of like um they're gonna be impotent. They don't have any force behind them.
Mm. But also not any depth.
No.
I can't ask just you, but I'm kind of keen to know from people like what kind of movement they're looking for or involved with, like what like they think the direction is that they want to take, you know?
Mm.
I don't think everyone has to be a part of the same movement. And it's not always about building something new.
Mm.
And it's also not always about joining something else. But it's like, I mean, everyone's going to have their own movements like within the world. But it's like, I want to know what people think that is, or what their kind of like highest goal of that is, you know? Like, that's like kind of the point of Damn Ocean, is to like engage with that, each of us individually, and anyone else who kind of touches on it or comes into contact with it.
Mm.
Like, you know, exploring what that highest like goal or whatever can be, and like working on them together. Like, we don't have to be wanting to do the same thing, but like, it's like you can't do anything by yourself. I mean, no, you can do a lot of things by yourself, but it's like combining with other people. It's like it's always going to be a combination of different things, and it's like it makes each of those things super dank if like they're put into collaboration with each other.
Mm.
It's never going to be like a combination of people with who are the same, because like no one is the same, but it's like you put those goals and ideas into collaboration with each other, and they become like movement or higher layers of movement in the world or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I feel like the current movements. I don't feel like there are many like movements in my life right now, especially in Japan. I think movements don't really happen so like visibly here, which
Mm.
is like there is an aspect of all movements that is invisible, and maybe the invisible bit is the most exciting part. You know, it's that's where like the magic exists, where you only really start to realize it until after you've like been creating communities for a very long time. And yeah, I mean, for me, the interesting concept of movement building is to just generate communities that um, can efficiently share knowledge and wisdom and skills in a way that isn't mediated by bureaucratic um, channels that make access to those things very difficult.
Mm. Do you have like a specific like flavor of like what you're kind of like what you're trying to build, or is it kind of more or less open to the people who engage with it or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I've always struggled with regards to trying to create communities. Um,
Same.
like generating interest, I think, is super difficult at the beginning, and to a certain extent, like you need to. It's almost like the beginning of a movement is like nothing to do with the community. It's just about you like setting an example and just like going for it by yourself. And then it's other people who are like, oh, okay, that sounds like what you're doing looks cool. I want to join in. Um, so um, yeah, whenever I've tried to like create a community with like a small group of people, it's very hard to like get it off the ground because it's just like all planning and like no action. So like the actual action can't ever be a communal thing, at least not in the beginning. Well, like I think it's always like never communal. It's like, you know, the participation, the act of joining a community or a movement has to always be from within the self.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difficult thing to sort of, you know, convince people to like enter a community, because like it's, you know, it's a big ask really to ask someone to, you know, spend their time on something that you want to do, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's like you can't really convince people of anything necessarily. Like you can like manipulate people into representing things the same way as you, but like that's not the same thing. Like, and like I'm the same. Like I've been like working on starting stuff or trying to get stuff moving for like years, like probably 10 years. But like it's only really started to like gain traction, yeah, when I like linked it up with people who also have something they want to do, you know, and it doesn't actually have to be the same thing, but it's like people who have motivation to do something can like pull their resources or their force or whatever and like bring something into existence. I mean, because it's not about what, you know, it's not about the image or the way people represent the movement. It's about moving. Like it's about making movement. So it doesn't matter what two things you put together. And it took me ages to realize that. Like the first kind of like things I tried to get together were like trying to find people who were doing what I was doing. But they weren't there because like they're not me, you know? Like I wasn't gonna find people who are like me. I was gonna find people who are like themselves on the level that I'm myself or whatever. So like, I don't know, like a real important thing for me with like combining people together or like building up like a network of people is that like not being like, hey, do you want to do this thing? But being like, hey, what do you want to do? And they're like, I really want to do this thing. And I'm like, yeah, me too. Because it doesn't have to be exactly the idea that I had, but it's like, I can contribute to that and make it into the thing that I want to do if I'm flexible enough or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, it's very important to leverage at the beginning, to leverage like everyone's individual talents and skills and also everyone's individual motives. So
Yeah.
that, which is a very exciting part of building a community, because it's like it's when it's most volatile, right? It's like you don't know anything about what this like second person is gonna contribute to the community, and you have to also be very prepared to let the new direction of the community be like totally different to what you envisioned in the beginning.
Yeah.
Being too concrete with your goals and ambitions for the movement, I think, can often just it ensures that it never gets off the ground.
Yeah. Yeah, like the thing that you're contributing like is yourself anyway, but like people are like so scared of letting go of the thing that they identify with that they end up not being able to emerge in the world as themselves because like they won't let go of this external image or whatever. I don't know, like everyone wants validation and like recognition or like attention or whatever. And I don't mean that in a purely egotistical way, but like it makes people feel good for you to be like, what's up? What are you doing? Like, what? Tell me about what you're doing. Like, what's cool about what you're doing? What are your ideas about? And like, I mean, like, a lot of people are actually too like wrapped up in themselves to even express those things. But like, when people are, like, a light goes on, you know, and they're like, I want to express this thing and I want to do it this way. And it's like, if people are at that point, then you can be like, let's do that way. And I reckon it becomes a movement, or it becomes a project at least. But it's like hard to bring people even into like a real communication unless they're like already there for it for themselves, you know. Like, if they're not having that kind of like emotional communication with themselves, or emotional like feedback where they're like, you know, this is what I'm feeling, this is my relationship with the world, whatever, like a shape or a pattern that they have in the world, then it's like, it's not communication, it's just like noise or trash or whatever.
Yeah. Words aren't communication, bro.
Yeah.
I think it's like, well, the other thing is that people are always in communities, whether they like it or not. And, you know, like Instagram is a community, right? So people are already invested in these systems anyway.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Instagram is an infrastructure, but I don't know if it's a community, you know, like it offers like the transportation of data, but it doesn't really offer connectivity between people, you know? And it's like, yes, you can definitely use that to engage with people. But I think a lot of people don't, or they're not ready to, or they don't understand how to, you know, because like it's just easier to rely on the infrastructure for what it does, which is exchange data, and then just be doing it at that level and not finding more dynamic levels of that interface or of interfaces in general.
I feel like it is a community, but it's just like a very low resolution community where like you can't, it's not satisfactory, right? It's not, you can't, there's a limit to how much development, like personal, spiritual, meaningful relationship you can build with people on a platform like that. But well, I'm not saying that social media is like not an important aspect of people's communications with each other, and you
We're
can't.
like on Skype. We're like on Skype right now.
Yeah, so it's like, you know, you can use it for that, but I don't think it necessarily promotes that use, and I don't feel like it's designed for that kind of usage either.
Mm. Well, should we wrap it up a little bit?
Yeah.
Um, should we say some stuff that sounds like wrapping up kind of stuff?
um okay, yeah, do you want to go?
Actually, maybe that's good. Maybe we should just use that.
Yeah, we could do, but I think we've got enough content there.
Yeah. Well, I want to say that like I'm real keen for like people to, you know, like engage with us and talk to us about what we are doing and what they want to do, you know? Like read the comments, engage in the comments. And like, I don't know, like I'm always keen to like hear about shit people want to do and like new possibilities for projects and shit. Like I want people to like not be shy about sharing the shit they want to do, or even just like their feelings with me, you know? Like it doesn't make a difference to me, like, but I want to hear like people's honest shit. And that relates to like the, you know, the masculinity thing and like the self exploration thing and the movement building thing, you know, like they're just different facets of the same movement that we need to be doing together or whatever.
Right. And yeah, I mean, I think me and Max will always be down for like talking about any topic that you want us to like weigh in on. So, yeah, every week on Instagram, I'm like asking for different topics for the next show. So, yeah, if you want to hear us talk about anything that you wanna know about in particular, or you want to like spark a discussion on, then hit us up.
Yeah, we'll post our Instagrams in the description just for the self plug. And also just about that, about the movement building thing. Everyone's doing it all the time anyway. It's just that it's easier to contribute your movement and your building to the infrastructures or systems that already exist. Like, it's not about like building a full image. It's just that the practice that you do in your life anyway is already movement. And if you redirect that to something that is more important to you, then it becomes something more important to you, rather than like staying like a, just like a background shadow in amongst all the other movement.
Mm. Right. Yeah.
So
Choose your
I kind of went back in
wisely.
time there a little bit.
Choose your movements wisely. Because
Yeah.
everyone is doing it, like you said.
Yeah.
So it's like you can join movements that give you the agency to realize your goals, or you can join movements that don't do that.
Yeah, and like be engaged with what your body and your mind are producing all the time. That's it. That's like all you can do, really.
Mm. Yeah.
So I don't know. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I'm tuning in here from a farm in Alexandra or Alexander in the South Island of New Zealand in Otago.
Right. I'm just in my bedroom.
Yeah, that's cool too.
All right. Bye, everyone.